But alas, I did not. Precipice miss. Oh, that's not going to help at all. Bowerdad here, and welcome to episode 15 of Why Did I Lose, the video series where I honestly review my ranked losses in order to learn and improve. This league sucks. I'm just gonna say it. This league is awful. The Incineroar is kind of a nuisance by itself, but unfortunately paired with the Regieleki, that makes it super dangerous. I'm not exactly at liberty to Tailwind, and Regieleki can deal huge damage to both of these targets. I decided to protect Kyogre and attempt to Icy Wind in order to get more of that delayed overtime speed control. But it turns out the move for Tornadus isn't really going to matter because Incineroar is going to fake it out, which I did expect. What I did not expect was the Regieleki to Dynamax. It was a good call by my opponent. Regieleki is very threatening to the entire set of Pokemon that I brought here for this game. And so that Protect with Kyogre did end up being very good, but it still took over half of its health. So I can't really keep Kyogre in good conscience. I could conceivably Tailwind here, but I decided that I'm going to swap out the Kyogre and put in my Incineroar. At this point, I just want to stall out the Regieleki as much as humanly possible before attempting to retake the game. They're actually pulling their Incineroar for Groudon, and I didn't consider that they might want to stop the Weather War here, but I'm really glad that I made the switch, because Kyogre will come in later, and that will be just fine. Thankfully, Incineroar survives, very, very important, and I do get to Icy Wind this time. My whole idea here is that I want to delay my Tailwind by a few turns, so that way I have it going into the middle and late game and not just in the early game. Groudon is going to go right back away for Incineroar. I am going to get my Tailwind up. My Fake Out doesn't do much, which is fine. I'm going to get that Tailwind, and then I'm going to get a Max Lightning. Tornadus did Tailwind on the turn that it got KO'd, so I waited just long enough. My Kyogre is going to come back in, reclaim the reign, and Regieleki's Dynamax is going to end. At this point, I've stalled out Regieleki's Dynamax, but my opponent continues to position themselves pretty well. I'm down a Tornadus, my Incineroar and Kyogre are already both pretty roughed up. My opponent has a pretty healthy lineup still, so this is still scary. I still have a Dynamax that I haven't used, but I'm trying to feel out these next couple of turns. I feel that Origin Pulse is a good call here because I have the Tailwind up. My opponent's Incineroar doesn't go for the Fake Out, which is really interesting. So this Origin Pulse is going to go off. It's going to do super effective damage to both targets. However, we're in Sun because of that Groudon switch in. Very good call on their part. This Parting Shot is going to be very handy. Will allow me to reposition, but also, as it turns out, my opponent had the same idea. They are going to reposition with their own Parting Shot. I'm pretty grateful that this goes into my Kyogre instead of the Zacian, because at this point, I have to swap out Kyogre anyway in order to reset the Rain, and now that I have a debuffed special attack, there's even more reason to do so. So now we're back to Regieleki Groudon, and deciding to swap Kyogre is pretty easy here. I just need to sacrifice Incineroar in order to reset the stats and reset the Rain. And in the meanwhile, Regieleki is the big threat to my Kyogre. If I can just get rid of Regieleki, everything is going to be fine. So I play rough into that slot after swapping out the Kyogre. Now, unfortunately, after this Intimidate happens, Regieleki is actually protecting this turn. It always surprised me because I usually don't use Protect on my Regielekis. Feels so disrespectful. Incineroar is going to munch this Shuca Berry, but it's not going to help him keep any of those 15 HPs that he has left. My Kyogre will come back in, and this will be my last two Pokemon, Zacian and Kyogre. And for the first time during this game, I feel like I actually have enough runway to put on some offensive pressure. I decide to Water Spout for the accuracy and play rough into the Regieleki. Unfortunately, Regieleki gets out of there. Incineroar will get that Intimidate onto Zacian, bringing it back to neutral attack power. The Play Rough doesn't quite pick up the KO, but the Water Spout definitely will, and I bring two of my opponent's Pokemon down at the same time. Unfortunately, my Tailwind ends at this point, and a personal plot twist for me is this Zacian. I thought for some reason it was only Regieleki, and now I have a big problem. Unfortunately, this endgame here is really, really, really bad for me. I'm checking all the stats of the Pokemon. There's just rain up. My opponent's Zacian is at +1 attack. As you'll remember, mine is at a 0, or rather neutral attack, because I got the Intimidate along with the Intrepid Sword. So my Zacian is at a disadvantage to their Zacian, and my opponent's Regieleki is obviously really good against my Kyogre. I try to play rough the Regieleki for the third time this game, and for the third time this game, it is blocked. Everyone protects except for Zacian, and the play rough does not connect. And at this point, I still have a Dynamax to use, but I mean, I can't really stand up to Regieleki anyway. I do decide to go ahead and Dynamax to see if I can maybe hold on. And Behemoth Blade, Zacian. You're going to see something really tragic here in a moment. Kyogre gets huge. It is awesome. And then my opponent will immediately knock it out with a Thunderbolt. Didn't even get to do anything. I could have conceivably tried to max guard here on top of the Protect. However, as you're going to see here in a moment, my Behemoth Blade doesn't do near enough to pick up the KO, whereas my opponent's Zacian will have enough. My Zacian gets KO'd, and that's the game. In the Series 12 metagame, we have a very unique challenge of deciding which Pokemon we should Dynamax when we have 2 restricted legendaries who would obviously be really good for the role. If one of your restricted Pokemon is Zacian, Zamazenta, or Eternatus, that limits your Dynamax option. Depending on who you bring, you might find yourself with only one obvious Dynamax candidate, and that was my case for this game. The lead that I was up against was extremely dangerous. My opponent did have that option to go ahead and Dynamax and attack my Kyogre and effectively get rid of my Dynamax strength for that game. As you saw in the endgame, I tried to Dynamax Kyogre, but it didn't really matter. The why did I lose question can be boiled down to the way that lead was. I did protect my Kyogre on turn 1. I probably should have just swapped it out from the get-go, perhaps even doing a double swap, removing Tornadus and Kyogre. Regieleki was going to go nuts anyway, but at least I could have saved my speed control, saved my heavy hitter, perhaps gone in later and cleaned up rather than trying to stall with the Pokemon that were in front of me. If conserving the appropriate Pokemon for a mid to late game Dynamax turnaround is something that you struggle with, I would encourage you to check out my most recent video, the episode of Why Did I Lose right before this, where there are some similar lessons learned in terms of which Pokemon I should have Dynamaxed and when. So check that out if you haven't already, and that's my time. I'll see you next week.